the casualty counts are very high on the Palestinian side. They're not high on the Israeli side. That must mean that Israel is committing a war crime. Now the question is, what's the war crime? The war crime they'll talk about is generally something like disproportionality. Now, did we talk about the rule of disproportionality? No, we haven't, so this is a good time to mention it. The law of disproportionality, or proportionality, is another customary rule that states that when attacking legitimate military objectives, we'll have to talk in a moment about what legitimate military objectives there are, but when attacking legitimate military objectives, it is permissible to cause collateral damage to civilians so long as that damage is proportionate to military necessity. Now, let me give you an example of that. Now, here's, after the war in Kosovo, there were a number of complaints that were lodged with the prosecutor for the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, accusing NATO forces of committing crimes of lack of distinction and disproportionality in their use of force against Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia, or Serbia, whatever you'd like to call it. And here's a great example of the way the rule of proportionality works in combat. Okay, one of the accusations that was made was that the NATO forces had improperly targeted a TV and radio broadcast station. Now, the facts about this are more or less clear, that NATO forces bombed this station. They bombed it deliberately. There's some doubt over the exact casualty figures, but it says here between 10 and 17 people, all civilians, were estimated to be killed. And there were two questions. Was this a military objective? Was it a proper target? And then, if it was the damage to civilians, the 10 to 17 dead, for getting the station out of operation for no more than a few hours? Right? Let me just say, look at this here. NATO realized that attacking the RTS building would have only interrupt broadcasting for a brief period. Indeed, broadcasting allegedly recommenced within a few hours. Okay, so assuming that the television station was a legitimate military target, and the military necessity was to knock it out of operation for a few hours, was the damage here, 10 to 17 civilians dead, proportionate to military necessity? And the prosecutor said, oh, well, that part's easy. Right? Assuming the station was a legitimate objective, the civilian casualties were unfortunately high, but do not appear to be clearly disproportionate. Easy case, right? Not clearly disproportionate to kill, again, 10 to 17 civilians to knock out a station for 3 hours. Right? All right, so that's what the way proportionality is applied in cases outside of here. Now, what are the figures? Let me just add one more thing. What about the fact that
how do you measure something? Just out of your report.
You know, there's a great Justice Scalia line about balancing tests, which is that a lot of these balancing tests involve measuring whether a rope is longer than a rock is heavy, and that's exactly what you're supposed to do here. You're supposed to measure incommensurate things. I don't know how one measures the value of a civilian human life and compares it on a scale to military necessity. All I can tell you is that the powers that be out there in applying this think that 10 to 17 dead civilians is clearly proportionate when you're talking about knocking a station out for 3 hours. Now, if we compare military necessity of knocking out stations for 3 hours and numbers of casualties, I think you'll get to, it'll be hard to find any case of an Israeli attack in Gaza that even gets close to that. That high a civilian casualty rate for that small a target. I also wanted to mention some items about general figures. If you look at the Israeli numbers in Gaza, has anybody seen numbers for casualties? What numbers have you seen? 1,300. Now, does anybody know where that number? This is the number. 1,300 is the number used in almost every report and by the UN. Where does it come from? It comes from the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza. Now, who is the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza? Hamas. Okay, so we've got Hamas figures out there that say there are 1,300 dead. They also say that there were 48 Hamas fighters that died, and 49 Israeli soldiers that died. Of course, this 48 to 49 has nothing to do with convenience in describing the mighty Hamas fighting force, nor does this low figure of 48 in any way reflect a desire to make it that to paint Israel as having attacked civilians. Now, there's a different number that's out there that you haven't seen almost anywhere, right, because it's the Israeli number, and it is roughly 700 dead, of which approximately 500 were Hamas fighters. Now, pardon? You can look at the names of the dead. Although for obvious reasons, Israel has chosen not to share with us its intelligence and various things having to do with Hamas. Now, again, all these numbers here are a little bit fuzzy. Any one of these, 605, 20,000 to 200,000. All I can tell you is that when you hear a number out there that says 1,300, the UN reports 1,300 dead. You're hearing the same kind of number you heard in Lebanon, where the UN reported 1,100 dead. It reported 1,100 dead because that's what the Lebanese government told it. The Lebanese government reported 1,100 dead because that's what Hezbollah told it. Right?